All right, welcome to Module 5, so Assignment 5, and today we're going to be talking about Chapters 14 and 15, and we're going over sleeves. So you might have noticed that I jumped over the chapter on skirts. We're going to do that next week for the next module, and the reason I'm keeping it with sleeves is we've been working with the bodice front, we've been working with the bodice back, so I just want to stick the sleeves in, so let's just stay on the top half of the body. And next week we'll move to the bottom part of the body. So, if you want to turn to page 303, that is the beginning of this chapter that we're interested in looking at. So 303, there's a couple things I want to point out in 303, on page 303, that are important. Some things to kind of be aware of, anyhow, so yeah. We want to go there. So 303, terminology as we're going through the sleeve. So you'll see a picture of, whoops, I dropped something. You'll see a picture of your sleeve right there. And it's got some other lines indicated where it's basically the sleeves have been divided into fourths. That might actually be a good idea for you to do, to just come into your pattern and just indicate where those fourths hit on the arm here, because that will help you identify where on your actual arm it will go. So when I pull the camera down and we look, I'm going to go back over the sleeve and where each part of the sleeve is going to hit on the body. So sleeve cap. This is the sleeve cap. Cap height refers to this line between the bottom here and here. From here up to the top, that refers to the sleeve cap. The sleeve ease is referring to basically this dimension from here to here. You take your bicep measurement, so around here, and around here, and whatever that measurement of the body is, you want to add 1.5 to 2 inches of ease just for movement. When you have a pattern like this, it should already have the ease built into it when you're done. So when we get to drafting our own patterns, we'll take the body measurement and add that dimension in. But by the time it gets to this, that ease will be built in. The elbow level is on level. You notice there's a line extending out from this dart here. This is the elbow dart. At the end of the dart, that is the apex. The end of this dart is the apex, and it is your elbow. You'll notice that it's hit at the back quarter. At the back quarter where the dart ends, this is where your elbow sits. And at that level, if you take that line and extend it straight across, that is where your elbow is. That line right here. Wrist level, just down here. And what it's referring to is if you feel on your arm, there's a little bone here and a bone here. And that line hits right between them. So when you find on your wrist, oh, there's my wrist. It's right between those bones. So when you're taking measurements, that's where you're ultimately going to be taking measurement for the wrist. Your grain line, basically, they describe it weird, but basically what it is it's dead center, and then it's perpendicular to that line, straight up and down. That is where your grain line is. Yeah, and then it's referring to the notches. So 2 notches on the back, 1 notch on the front. This top one, you'll notice is not exactly dead center. That is because it's referring to the seam on your bodice front and your bodice back. This line right here lines up with that right there when they've been put together. So that's all I really want you to see on 303. You can change elbow dart variations and such, but that's basically all I want you to look at and know from 303. On 304, you should be aware of this. It's referring to how big your sleeve, like if you're adding a shoulder pad, you're going to have to alter the sleeve cap height to add a shoulder pad in, and it's just basically you're taking it up whatever dimension you want on your shoulder pad. So if you want a 1/2 inch shoulder pad, that means your sleeve is going to have to the sleeve cap is going to have to get 1/2 inch taller. But it's also showing that on the front piece and on the back piece, this also has to go up, and this also has to go up. Basically what it's doing is it's creating a body that has a squarer form. So instead of having a 2 inch or a 1.5 to 2 inch slope from your high point shoulder down to the tip of your shoulder, basically however much we add in shoulder pad is bringing you that much closer to be perfectly like straight across from high point shoulder. Usually a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch is a good shoulder pad if you ever want to make shoulder pads. But once you get it much beyond that, then you start looking at shoulder pads that we had in the 80s, and we don't necessarily want to bring back that realm. If you do look at 304, there's the other version. It says how to add it to the top here. On the first version, she just draws it on top. On the second version, she slashes and spreads this open. That's the better version. Go with the second version, the one that says another version. That's a better version because you can control exactly how much space gets added at the top so that you know how much to add on the front and on the back. It's a lot more precise. So that's it for 304. Actually, going back to 303, just looking at my notes, I realized that if you look at cap ease, it says ranging from 1 inch to 7.5 inches. I don't like those numbers. Those are huge numbers. Instead, what I would have is I'd refer to how much ease you have on the front of the sleeve and how much you have on the back of the sleeve. On the back, the difference between the sleeve, I guess actually we didn't talk about cap ease earlier. What it's talking about is how much extra space there is compared to, where's my back? Oh, I'm holding my back. Compared to the front. So this measurement here along the armhole and this measurement here along the back armhole on these two pieces does not match the measurement from here to here. On the sleeve, this measurement is bigger, and we have to take the sleeve and ease it in. So earlier on in the semester, I talked about ease, where you take the fabric and you have to sort of condense, if these are my warp fibers or whatever fibers they happen to be, we put a line of stitching there and make them compress. That's what it's referring to when it says easing this sleeve into the front and back bodice. We typically have 1/2 inch on the back. So this dimension should be about 1/2 inch bigger than the same armhole opening on your bodice back. And on the front, it should be about 1/4 inch bigger. And I'm not talking half size here, I'm talking full size here. So she says 1.5 to 2, not 1.5, 1 to 1 7/8 inch bigger on this guy completely. That's too much. It really should only be 1/2 inch here and 1/4 inch here, so 3/4 inch total. The only time that that's going to be an exception is when we are making suits. For just like a fitting garment, it should be 1.5. It should be about 3/4 inch total. When we're making suits, then it can get a little bit bigger, but that's a case-by-case scenario. And at that point, then I might consider about I'd consider maybe 3/4 inch on the back and maybe 1/2 inch on the front. I wouldn't even go crazy more than that. Otherwise, you end up this weird puffiness going on. Yeah. So going back to where we were before on the book. So we just talked about 304 and shoulder pads. At the bottom of it, it talks about cuffs. You will need to know about the measurement. Basically, squeeze your hand as much as possible, and we're going to be measuring around that dimension for getting cuffs. So you can't make the sleeve narrower than that unless you're dealing with a knit, and then sure you can, but because it'll stretch around it. But when we're dealing with wovens, that's the smallest we can go. But when it comes to cuffs, we're going to talk about that in Module 9 when we talk about finishings. Cuffs are a way of finishing. There might be a couple more times I mention them in the chapter, but we'll focus more on them on Module 9. Yeah. Right now, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to move this up, and we're going to look at sleeve theory. And just so you can kind of understand, because I've shown this and I've talked about the cap, and you might be looking at that shape and wondering where it comes from. So I'm going to pull you up and we're going to talk about sleeve theory and why this is the shape that it is and why it's this specific dimension and what happens if we change this dimension, what has to happen to the edges here, all of that, we're going to talk about some sleeve theory. So I'm going to pull you up and we're going to look at it with a dress form. Okay, so I have my mannequin and I'm going to talk about sleeve theory. So the idea with sleeve theory is, how do we get this shape? Where does it come from? It's a really bizarre shape, especially when you think about what it has to get sewn into. So where does it come from? So if you start thinking about your body as just a series of really basic shapes, the arm is basically just a cylinder. So I have a cylinder here. It's just a tube of paper. So now if we wandered around with our arms sticking straight out like this, just like that, the sleeve cap would be perfectly flat. We'd have the sleeve come up and go perfectly flat across. Unfortunately, I don't know about you guys, but I don't wander around with my arm sticking straight out. That's just kind of uncomfortable. So this is a perfectly straight sleeve cap. Okay? Well, most of us have our arms sitting down at this level, or like this. If we have our arms perfectly at the side, it's just like that. Well, that's fine. So if this cylinder interacts at that level, what ends up happening is basically we've taken this circle. I realize this isn't an exact circle, but if we look at this as a circle, and we take that circle and we imprint it onto our cylinder. So here's our cylinder coming along and it hits this plane, and the circle is just going to start eating away. It's going to start eating away at our piece of paper. So to sit on the plane of the body that's right here, that circle is no longer going to hit the cylinder dead on. It's going to hit the cylinder at an angle. So I'm going to do this really quick off camera, but I'm going to take a circle and draw it on here. And I'll show you what I mean as soon as I finish. Drawing it on. So I have taken half the circle and put it here, and half the circle and put it up here. So that when this comes back to go on like this, basically that circle has intersected my cylinder. So when I cut that off, and I cut along the edges of my circle, and that's all I've drawn. I simply just have drawn a circle onto a cylinder. So here's the circle. You can see that circle that I cut out of my cylinder. And now it can fit onto my form, because the cylinder has come along and intersected. So then when I open this up at the underarm, I end up with that interesting shape of the sleeve cap. Okay? So that's where the shape comes from, the sleeve cap. So that's why we have this, is because basically you've got half your circle here and half your circle here. Here's half of it, here's half of it. Now, something to think about is our bodies aren't perfectly cylinder. So when you look here at the back, it's a lot smoother over the back here, and it caves off on the front more here. So when I was talking about sleeve cap ease, that cap ease that they were talking about, You need more ease back here because people want to do this with their arm. They want to move. So you've got to have a little bit more ease in the back arm. And on the front arm, it kind of comes along and caves off. And I don't know about you guys, but I don't wander around sticking my arm back like that. So we don't need as much ease through the front. The only ease that we need on the front is to account for the fact that I have a muscle here. I'm not perfectly straight and flat here. If I were perfectly straight and flat here, we wouldn't have any extra ease in the sleeve cap. But because we have a bulge of our shoulder sticking out, we want to ease it on just a little bit. Okay? So now I want to pull the camera down and we're going to talk about sleeve cap. Well, actually, no, while we're still up there. When I talked about our arm sticking straight out like this, the sleeve cap was perfectly straight. That sleeve cap that I showed you, that I made right here, it's pretty darn tall. You look at how tall that sleeve cap is, it's high. Well, what's the appropriate sleeve cap height? It basically depends on how high you want to lift your arm. So I'm going to sit down and talk a little bit more about that. So, going off the idea of how high do I make my sleeve cap, it's all dependent on how much, it's all dependent on how much you want the person to be able to move. If you want them to have the opportunity to wander around all day with their arms out like this, then make your sleeve cap perfectly flat. I don't know anybody who wants to do that. But at the same time, if you want someone to have the movement of like swinging a baseball bat or anything like that, or be at an office all day where you're sitting at a desk and your arms are like this, then your arms are getting a lot closer to being straight out all the time. So you're going to want a lot shallower sleeve cap. The higher the sleeve cap, the less movement you're expecting from your client. So those suit jackets that you want to have where they look perfectly pristine and their arms are down here at their side the entire time, you're going to end up with a really tall sleeve cap. You might end up with an 8-9 inch sleeve cap. But what that means is down here where it connects, the minute they lift their arm and go like this, it lifts the entire side of their shirt. So it means that, well, crud, the higher the sleeve cap, the less room there is for movement. The shorter the sleeve cap, the more room you have for movement, the more fabric is built in for movement. So then you have to ask the question, well, why don't we always just go with a shorter sleeve cap? Well, if your sleeve cap is perfectly flat, you've got a whole bunch of extra fabric added here for that extra movement. So the minute that you lower your arm, all of that fabric is going to start crunching up and bunching. So the more relaxed a garment is and the more ability for someone to have movement, look at their underarm, they're going to have a lot of extra fabric sitting here because they have a lower sleeve cap. Those suit jackets that you see where someone's standing there and it's perfectly smooth through here and it's perfectly smooth on the jacket and everything, that's because they wanted the look to be absolutely pristine. So they gave up mobility for looks, is basically what happens. So there's a sweet spot for every style. There's really a sweet spot for every style. So if you want that pristine look, go for a high sleeve cap, but just expect your people not to be able to move totally freely. If you want a lot of movement, then unfortunately your client better be darn okay having a lot of extra fabric underneath their arm. The one thing that we run into is with like ballroom dancers, we take the underarm and we shove it all the way up into the armpit so that they can still look pristine and perfect without lifting up the edge of their jacket. But that's not feasible for everyone because it's really uncomfortable to have your sleeve seam all the way up in your armpit. So for like a ballroom dancer suit jacket, that's going to look a little bit different just because of what they're requiring from their clothing. But we rarely do that for the everyday wearer of suit jackets and some things like that. Since we've just talked about sleeve theory, we're going to go back to the book. And there is a technique on page 307 that I want you to be aware of. So go ahead and read 307, and I'm looking specifically at figure 2, and what they're doing is they're showing how to finish hems up, and this will work with the hem of a shirt. It'll work all over the place when you're finishing the bottom of the hem to figure out the shape that it needs to be for sewing later. This is a really good technique. So figure 2, she says to draw it, but honestly, if you just attach your seam allowance and then fold all of those up, if you cut on your seam allowance, on your cut line, it'll give you the shapes that you need to be done. So figure 2 is a great thing that I want you to look at. Page 308, it talks about cap sleeves. I want you to read that by yourself because they're pretty self-explanatory. Basically, they're just taking this, drawing a new line, cutting it off, and it's good to go. The section where she takes stuff in 1/4 inch on figure 1A, if you look at the bottom of the curved hemline, she brings things in 1/4 inch. That seems kind of like an arbitrary number, but it's actually really good practice. Yeah. And then we're going to go on to page 309, and this is another, it's called the Dartless sleeve pattern. So you have the darted sleeve pattern, where it's got a little dart at the elbow. We're going to create one of these guys without the dart, but I don't like how she does it. She just takes these lines and extends them straight down, and that makes it way too flowy, and we don't need to start with that. So I'm going to bring you down and I'll show you how to do the new version, and I would collect another one of these hard pieces of paper with the dartless version, so you don't always have to be doing something with this dart. We can get rid of it. It's okay. Alright, so I'm going to develop out a new sleeve. So I've got my old sleeve here, and I'm on page 309, so they are doing the dartless sleeve pattern. And this is a great sleeve pattern to have. But I don't like the way that they do it because they make it too floofy, and we don't want it that floofy. So I'm going to start transferring over my pattern, and I'm only transferring down to the elbow. I'm transferring everything from up above. My notches, my grain line. Let me grab my grain line. And then I'm also, so that's all I have transferred is from here and everything up here, including all of these lines. And I can get this line right here from just lining up this corner and that corner. So, got that. I'm going to do it with pen so that it looks good in the long run. So I am transferring over this bicep measurement. I'm giving myself my grain line measurement, and this is actually the center line of the sleeve, so I'm going to draw it all the way down the pattern. I'm also giving myself that elbow line, and I'm making sure that it is perpendicular to my grain line. I wasn't just arbitrarily drawing these, I was going according to little dots that I had stabbed in my paper. I've got those, and then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to pencil. Instead of the way they go, like adding it straight down, I just follow the line that already exists. I take that straight down, and the dimension that I take it straight down is the dimension of the center. So this is 4 1/8. Actually, no. Sorry, I take that back. I go with the front measurement, which is 4. So I come down 4 inches. On the front and 4 inches on the back. And just do a quick double take to make sure that the back and the front are the same measurement. And if they are any different, pick one of them and make both of them the same thing. So here is my sleeve without an elbow dart. And I'm going to cut it out and I'll be good to go. And then I'm going to use this one to develop the 2-inch sleeve cap. Alright, so I made everything pretty and I cut it out and I have my little label here. It is a size 8 and I do need a cut 2. Remember, some of you guys are not doing this on your assignments. You've got to have the size on there and you've got to have the cut number on there. And it is the size number over the cut number. Okay? And this is half size. So, in order to make this into a shorter sleeve cap, I'm going to transfer it onto white paper first, and then I'm going to finalize it onto harder paper later, just to make sure I get it correct. I just wanted to look at this while on camera. So this sleeve cap right here, it's 2 3/4. So basically this is, it's a 5.5 inch sleeve cap in real life, so that's getting fairly tall. Usually about 3 to 4 inches is a good sleeve cap height. So I'm going to transfer this over to develop and show you how to change sleeve cap heights using this. And it's going to show you what has to happen the lower the sleeve cap gets. And it's just the nature of the way sleeve caps work. So if anybody ever comes to you and is asking for a really fitted sleeve but the mobility of a 2-inch sleeve cap, you will know why to say go take a height. So I'm getting my center line, I'm getting underarm line. These two lines I always get because this one's going to be my grain line and this one is a good reference point. I'm also going to transfer over the elbow level on this as well. Okay, so here's the concept. In order for the sleeve cap to come down, as this is coming down, that means the underarm is going to go out. So the lower the sleeve cap, the wider the sleeve. As the sleeve cap comes down, the underarm seam will go out. I'll be able to like taper it in a little bit, but not a ton. So the higher the sleeve cap, the tighter the sleeve can be. So if you want a really tight sleeve, you can get there 2 ways. You can use a knit fabric, but you know my opinions on knit fabric. It just means, you know, you can get kind of lazy with some of the pattern making. Or you have to have a higher sleeve cap if you want to have a tight sleeve. Okay. So now that it is in this form, I'm going to do several cuts on this. I'm going to cut down the middle. To but not through the base. And to but not through the point up here. Actually, you know what? I messed up. I went to the notch instead of to my other mark, so I'm going to start that over. Okay, so I've got everything transferred over, and I'm going to start cutting down the middle on my grain line. 2 but not through the base, and 2 but not through the top up here. And then the other part that I'm going to cut is this underarm, 2 but not through here. And 2 but not through here. But I'm going to let it hinge. And I'm going to let it hinge over here. I'm going to let it hinge up here. And basically what's going to happen is as I let the sleeve cap drop, you see how the sleeve cap is getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter? The sleeve is getting wider and wider and wider and wider. So I can still keep the same dimension down here, but this is going to get shorter here. But the sleeve itself is actually also getting shorter as too. So I'm going to have to make sure that whatever height I took out here, I put on down at the bottom so that the sleeve is still the same length. So I only ever really want to do this once. That's why we keep blocks around us, because I don't want to have to redo this process for the sleeve over and over and over again. It's a pain in the tush to develop a 2-inch sleeve cap or just any other sleeve cap. But this is how you play around with sleeve cap height. And the way that I know that it is going down the right dimension is basically I take this underarm line right here, and on a full size I just make sure that this comes down until it hits the 2-inch point. So I'm lining it up here. On a full size, sometimes it doesn't like to start pivoting. Oh crud. That might happen. It's okay. It just means you have to make sure that you're always lining them up. Or tape them and recut it. I think I'll tape it and recut it. Okay. So as it's going, I'm lining my ruler up here perfectly on to my underarm. And if this was a full size, I'd be done. I wouldn't be lowering that any higher because the sleeve cap point hit my 2-inch mark. But this isn't a full size, this is a half size, so I have to keep on pushing it out until the tops of, notice how it's kind of going down in. Notice how it's kind of going down in. I'm going to go with the highest point. That the highest point hits the new sleeve cap height. And then I don't move anything, I make sure everything's perfectly flat. And I tape it down. Now this will require some finagling with this area right here. That's to be expected. But I'm just going to tape it all down and I'm going to draw myself some new lines. So the first line that I'm going to draw is over the top here. And I'm just going to get my French curve and I'm going to blend through there, just like that. The other thing is that I need these underarm, this right here gets really pointy. I'm going to take this and I'm going to square over from my underarm. And you're going to notice that it's going to do some interesting shape like that. That's okay. That's part of the development of this particular block. And I'm going to curve it up on both sides. Make it good on both sides. You could potentially, if you like one side better than the other, because we're doing something so relaxed, you could potentially just use one half of your sleeve, cut it down the middle right here. You've got this point that you've got, this point down here. You could cut this on fold if you want. You could make this the fold. But basically what we've done is we are blending out this new sleeve cap. So yeah, and then I'm going to take whatever the dimension it was before, which is why we have our original here. The sleeve length before, mine was 10 7/8. And now this sleeve is 8 3/4, so I need to add on the length again. Basically, I need to add on 2 inches on the bottom here to make it good for the length of what the sleeve's supposed to be. So it needs to come down to here now. I'm going to square that out. The base of the sleeve before was 5 inches, so I need to make sure that it's 5 inches still. And then from up here all the way down to there, I'm going to draw a new line. Like that. I realize that might be confusing, so maybe watch this a couple times, but then what I'm going to do is I'm also going to make sure, yeah, my underarm to my elbow didn't change. The sleeve cap changed, but from here to here didn't change. But the elbow point on this was exactly halfway. So I'm also going to change my elbow point, like where that happens. So it's going to happen right here now instead. There's lots of things that end up shifting around when you have to change the height of your sleeve. So my new elbow line is right here. So this is no longer a thing. This is no longer a thing. This is no longer. This is no longer. All of these, all of this, all of this, all of this goes away. I need to get where my my notches were. That was 1/8 of an inch over. So here's where my notch needs to be. These notches, figure out where they have to be. Basically transfer everything over that was on the old one. To the new lines. And that's going to make life a lot easier. To have a block that's a short sleeve cap is going to be a lot easier when you get to making a raglan sleeve. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to transfer over to hard paper so that I have a good copy for that. So we're going to look at page 310. I don't like the modifying armhole to reduce sleeve cap ease. I don't like that. I don't think you ever need to worry about doing that. I have never done that in my entire career as a pattern maker, or needed to do that. There's other ways for us to go about getting rid of sleeve ease. But we're going to start into puffed sleeves, and I want you to look at design 1, design 2, and design 3 and determine the differences between them. So if you go ahead and look at design 1, you'll notice there's not any extra puff right around here. All of the extra puff happens lower. So it starts smooth and then goes puff at the bottom before it sucks into a little sleeve cuff. So that's adding extra puff at the bottom of the sleeve. Or on design 2, it's really nice and tight down here, but they've added puff up above. And you'll notice that there's height to the puff. It doesn't just gather in, it actually goes and puffs out a lot. So it's starting to look like a leg of mutton sleeve, but that's not how we get to the leg of mutton sleeve. This technique isn't how we do that. So just when you're looking at your assignment, this is one option that you can do. You have 3 options for your first pattern. You can do a puffed sleeve, a leg of mutton sleeve, or you can do a cowl sleeve. I'm actually going to change that right now. If you choose to do a cowl, grand. I'm going to talk in here a little bit about how the cowl is a little bit problematic the way she does it, so I don't want you to have to worry about how to do that. And honestly, I'm not sure I've ever really seen a cowl sleeve in real life. They're not always fantastic. So choose between a puffed sleeve or a leg of mutton sleeve for your first assignment. And if you want, you can do a cowl as one of the your choice options. So back to what we were talking about. Design 2, it's going up and it's got height and puffing at the top, but it's nice and tight down at the bottom. And then design 3, it's puffing at the top and it's puffing at the bottom. So how do we do all 3 of them? And this is a really good illustration of how to do it. So if you go to 311, this is going to look very, very similar to some of the techniques we've already done with added fullness. So that's why we do added fullness first, because now it will apply to the sleeve. So to get that design 1, what they're showing is they're slicing along, slicing from the hem. So they've shortened the sleeve right here. That's puff sleeves work with shortened sleeves. So they've shortened the sleeve. How far? It doesn't really matter. You can do it to the elbow if you want. I wouldn't take it much lower than the elbow for a puffed look. But take a line just perfectly straight across here. Make sure that the front, both sides of the seam are the exact same dimension when you're done. And then what they're doing is they're just slicing up and introducing more fabric. Something that I do want you to notice that is a good thing. So it looks like she's just throwing a number at it. And I'll tell you what that number is and how to throw a number at it so that you're smart about how you throw a number at it. If you look at figure 2, she has this random fold where it's like add 2 inches here, and like that's the new line that she starts drawing from. When we think about puffs, we have to think about how much fabric it takes to go up and then back. So for her to have added 2 inches there, what it means is that the puff's going to come down and it's going to go down an extra inch from where you want it to finish and then come back up an inch. And then when it puffs, it's going to take all of it and just sort of billow it out as it gets sucked in to a little cuff right there. So take whatever height you want on the puff. So if you're going the opposite direction, if you go to page 312 and you look at figure 1, she does that, throws that same 2 inches at it. And what it means is it's staying nice and tight down here, but she wants it to come up and go up above the height of the shoulder an inch and then come down to the shoulder an inch. So it's adding height to the sleeve cap so that when you wear this, it's not just sucking in like this, it's going and adding fullness to it. So you're going up however much and down however much, and that number is the number that you want to add on. So 2 inches is a good amount for a puff sleeve. So I'd stick with her 2 inches. You'll notice on figure 1 when she's adding fullness at the hem and at the cap on 312, so fullness at hem and cap, she's adding 2 inches at the top and she's adding 2 inches on the bottom. That's because she wants it to go up a whole bunch and she wants it to be able to just poof out a whole bunch as well. So think about how much poof you want, and that's the dimension that you're going to add on there. And it looks like she just arbitrarily draws a line. There are some techniques where you can get really, really, really precise on how much you add there. But this is a quick and dirty method that I'm okay with. The other methods take a lot more time, and ultimately this will be just fine. She does show from A to C on that horizontal guideline on figure 1 underneath fullness and hem, at hem and cap. She shows you to slide it out a certain dimension, and that's basically saying how much extra poof around. So figure out the ultimate circumference that you want, all puff included, and basically you take that number and divide it in half. Since she's got her paper folded here, she's only designing on half the sleeve. And that's how far she's got that laid out there. So I'll bring you down and I'll show you one of these. I'll decide which one when I start. So I'm not going to show you all three because these are actually pretty darn good instructions as far as the puff sleeve go. Alright, so into the puff sleeve, but before I go, I hadn't taken time to show you all of the sleeves that we have now. So we started out with this sleeve. It's got the elbow dart. That's the one that you got from the back of the book. The one that we developed from page 309, but that we do a little bit different than them, is this guy. It has no elbow dart, it's just a straight sleeve. And the final one is the 2-inch sleeve cap. This is a 1-inch because it's half size, but this is what it would kind of look like. Just note, it's the same height as the other sleeve that it came from, but look at all this extra fabric that you're adding in there. All of those other seams, like they all shifted, everything shifted. So, and look how much wider it is as well. So when you get a wider, lower sleeve cap, it gets wider. Okay, so I'm going to start with the puff sleeve. And the puff sleeve, we are at page 311. And I think the fullness at the hem makes sense. Take a good look at figure 4 on 311. That shows you the band that it gets sewn onto. And it'll basically they're measuring the bicep and adding 1 inch to 1.5 inches of ease. No, not 1 inch to 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches to 2 inches of ease around the bicep for movement. And that's the kind of band. So this particular band that they have here would be a 1-inch band. It would be 1 inch tall because there's that notch at the side. That's a fold line, so it would get folded. So I'm going to go ahead, and you know what? It doesn't matter whether I take this one or this one because I'm making a short sleeve. So I'm going to be doing the fullness at the hem and at the cap, since the fullness at the cap and at the hem, both of those I think make enough sense, you'll be able to figure them out. So I'm just going to do this other one. And to do it, I'm going to use this, but I will have already predetermined how far down I'm going to have my sleeve. I folded my paper in half. You don't necessarily have to fold it in half. The biggest thing that you need to make sure is that this line that they've got drawn across here as a guideline is the hem height that they've chosen. So let's just say I want this sleeve to come down about that far. That's how I want it, right here and right here. That's how deep I want my hem. So that's going to line up with the bottom. And then I just have to decide how full do I want it. So around the arm, do I want to add an additional 3 inches, an additional 4 inches? How much do I want it to poof? And at that point, just go ahead and take a soft measuring tape and stick it around your arm until you're like, yeah, this is how much poof I want. So let's say, 1.5 inches to 2 inches is fitting ease. So let's just say I want it to be, and that's at full size. So if at full size I wanted to add an additional 6 inches around the entire circumference of my sleeve, then half of that is going to come to this side and half of it's going to come to this side. So that means I need 3 inches on this side and 3 inches on this side. Since I'm working in half size, I'm just going to divide that in half. So I've got this needing to come this direction 1.5 inches. So whatever, when I line this all up, I want this to move along this line this direction 1.5 inches. So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to go slide it over there 1.5 inches. Make sure that I'm still lined up on my line. And then I'm going to trace on this side up to my 2 notches. And then on this side, I'm going to take it back to the middle, line it up perfectly. They're just assuming you're going to do the front and the back the exact same, so you could do it on full. And you could. That's one way to do it. Or you can develop it out a little bit more like this. So if here is the height of my sleeve cap, and let's say I want it to go up 1 inch and then down 1 inch, then I need to add a full inch up here, a full 2 inches up here to go up 1 inch and down 1 inch. So if I'm doing it this half size, divide that number in 2, so I'm just going to come up here 1 inch. And basically, you might want to place this back over here, just and kind of just sort of lightly draw this part of the sleeve cap so that as you're filling in the rest of this, you don't accidentally drop below where the sleeve cap was originally. So I'm going to go like that. Here's where it was. Here's where it was. And I just make sure that I'm consistently adding until it gets over to here. And I'm making sure that at the center point, it's at least 90 degrees for a little while, that it doesn't go up and it doesn't go down. It's 90 degrees for at least a little while before I start letting it drop down. And then I'm just blending it into the underarm, right where the notches happen. On the bottom, here's where my current hem is, but if I want it to go poof down here, and I'll probably want it to poof the same amount as it does up there, that means I'm going to bring this down the same amount that I brought it up. And I'm going to take this, and I can use a French curve to help me do this. I can eyeball it, but I'm going to want it to sweep like that. Oops, wrong way. I'm going to want it to sweep like that, so that by the time it gets back to this underarm hem, this can be 90 degrees for a little while before it starts sweeping out onto that. I'm just going to grab a nice little curve here. That fits it nicely there. This one. Fits it nicely there. I'm going to fold this guy in half. I'm going to come in here. I'm going to add my seam allowance. And then I'm going to cut this out. When you've got 2 layers, it's good to have an X-Acto blade, because otherwise if you lift it up, it could shift on you. That way it's not going to shift as much. I'm going to cut this out with it on a fold. I'm gonna grab my notchers. I only notched the first one so that it would transfer over to the other side, and then I notched this other one. Like, I opened it up so I only have one notch that got transferred over. So here's the front. I'm gonna get my notch at the top because I still want to know where to line stuff up. And then I can come back in here and I can add my seam allowance here. Just draw that line in. It's already present. I can just delineate where it is. And that is a puffed sleeve. What you would want to know is what the bicep dimension is supposed to be. And then this right here, you do need to label to gather to, let's see, the bicep dimension here originally was 6 1/4 inches. So I would say gather to 6 1/4 inches. And then I would develop my little cuff, my little band for this to get sewn onto. But gather to 6 1/4. I make sure that I have my grain line. I get rid of anything extra. If you can erase it, just erase it. If you can't erase it, then hash it out. Remember to keep a clean pattern at all times. The only information that should be on here is information that you want the seamstress to know. And if you can't erase it, then hash it off so that it's clear. Cool, so there's the puff. So now I'm going to talk about the leg of mutton sleeves. So we've talked about puff sleeves, and this is technically a puffed sleeve, but it's using the full length of the sleeve, so we have to approach it a little bit differently. Because we still want the bottom part of the sleeve, all of this area down here, to stay really fitted. So because we want this to stay fitted, we've got to approach how we add that puff and slash and add extra fabric in to create that puff. We have to add it differently. And so on 324, this is a good method for doing that. Figure 1, you've got your basic block here, and you're going in and you're going to be slashing down and over. Now the farther that you slash down and over and add extra in here, the wider it will get around your bicep. So you don't want to slash it too far down, because the whole point of a leg of mutton is to keep the sleeve really tight and slim, but then add a whole ton of fabric up there in the sleeve cap. So figure 2, that's how you do it. And it's the same thing with the puff sleeve. Figure out with your leg of mutton how high up you want your puff to extend beyond the top of the shoulder, and then add the same amount coming back down. So if you want it to go up an inch and then down an inch, you can do it that way. Notice though, on all of these, that even with the puff sleeve, this underarm area between here and the notches, rarely are we playing with that. Usually that stays the same because that's happening underneath here. And we don't want to add extra fabric underneath the arm. That would just look bad. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to bring you down and we'll talk leg of mutton. So we are moving to page 324. Now they start out with this pattern that has the elbow dart. You can do that if you want. You can use this other one if you want. I'm just going to use this other one because I'm not going to worry about the elbow dart. And if I finish up the pattern, guess what? You have to perfect that dart when you turn it in. So anytime you turn something in, you have to perfect all darts. So you might just want to not use that one unless the style itself requires it. So I'm going to transfer this over. Make sure that, this pattern piece is pretty big, so make sure that you're taping on seam allowance at the bottom. Gotta remember the seam allowance and the seam allowance at the top. All right, so I have it transferred over. I'm not using the elbow dart one. When you're putting in your straight line here, remember it doesn't line up with a notch up there. So make sure you're using an awl to differentiate that this line is the middle. This notch comes a little bit further to the front. Okay? Okay. So I've got all notches counted and present for. I've got my elbow line because I want this to remain nice and narrow. So I'm not going to do any slash lines that come down below this bicep area. So now I just have to determine where I want my slashing to happen. I can have it slash straight over, that's fine. Or I can have it slash up. I can have it start slashing here. The farther down the arm, the more fullness you're introducing into the bicep area. So I want this leg of mutton to stay pretty tight in here, and I'd like it to mostly just be up above. So I'm going to give myself 2 locations. I'm going to go half an inch down at one spot, and I'm going to go another half an inch down. So I'm really not coming that far down into the bicep area. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side so that the shape on the front of the sleeve and the shape on the back of the sleeve on the underarm are the same. It's going to remain the same distance, but the shape might be a little bit different, and I don't want a different shape. Then I'm going to pick a spot up here. It doesn't really matter. They're going to a single point. Doesn't really matter. And all you have to do is come in here and slash up through the top, and you are letting it open up all the way. And then to, but not through, the underarm seam. And to, but not through, the underarm seam over here. To, but not through here. Could you just do a single slash? You sure could. And then just not have a very big leg of mutton. Leg of mutton, we always see these pictures where they're huge and bouffant, but the technique of opening it up, if I only open it up this far, that's a cute little tiny puff. So the leg of mutton sleeve doesn't have to be massive. It can be. And you'd stuff it full of stuff to make sure that it maintains its height. But you can make the leg of mutton sleeve really, really, really tasteful and really beautiful. Leg of mutton sleeves are going to show up in a lot of bridal wear. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick this on a new piece of paper and grab my tape. I'm going to move these out of the way. And I'm going to tape this down. Something they do show it. Okay, good. Just making sure. They take this line in the middle and extend it straight up. This is our reference line. Something to make note of, here's where the height of the sleeve cap was before. This is where the height of the sleeve cap was before. So I need to start thinking, how much extra fabric do I want in here? Notice as I open this up, they go higher. At some point they're going to cap out before they start lowering again, but that's going to be so far up there that you'll probably decide to do something different before then. The fact that we've done 2 different lines here just allows it for us to control and make this a lot more gradual of a curve on the underarm. So what I probably will do is, just for the sake of this underarm curve, I'm going to make sure that on one side I take it up exactly half an inch and tape the bottom one into place. And then I do the exact same thing to the other side, so that both underarms are being treated the exact same way. Did you see that? Whatever I did to this side, they're the same. I measured up from here to make it the same. And now I get to decide for this last one, how poofy do I really want it to be? So currently, when it's all the way down like that, it gets not really any extra ease. Like there's maybe a little on the front and a little bit on the back, just because of that's the sleeve cap ease. But now we have to decide, do I want to add 2 inches, 3 inches, 4, 5, 6 inches in there? The more you add in, the wider this will open up and the more gathering you'll have at the top of the sleeve. Also, the higher that you lift this up, you are also, look at how much extra height you are adding up here. So what I would do if I were you is I'd say, how much do I want my sleeve to go up? I'd like it to go up probably an additional 2 inches. So to go up 2, I'm up 1 inch and then come down an inch. Actually, no, let's make it a bit more extreme. Let's go up 3 inches. So to go up, not 3 inches, up, I want it to go up 1.5 inches and down 1.5 inches. So I would need to add 3 inches at a full size pattern. So at a half size, I need to go up 1.5 inches. And then at this new height, this is something that they don't really do in the book. They just measure out here. I'm going to make a top up there and say that's where I want it to end up, so that it goes up and then comes down. And then I'm going to measure over on each of these sleeves. I'm visualizing how is this going to curve down into here. And when I've got it about the spot that I want, I'm going to measure the distance between them and I'm going to make sure that it's the same. So I want this one to come out to here and this one to come out to here. Make it on the same on one side as it is on the other. Tape it into place. And then I get to blend my old sleeve cap to the new height of the sleeve cap on one side. And if you want it to be perfectly symmetrical, you could fold this in half and cut it along there, or you could just use one of your French curves and make sure that you're curving it along the same point. So, yeah. Use the same part of the sleeve of the French curve to get it beautiful. That is a leg of mutton sleeve. So now I come back, I label it, I make sure all my notches are nice and big. I have to redefine this notch because it got taken out. So I'm going to put it back where it belongs, 1/8 of an inch away from my center line here. And then I need to figure out what this dimension was before. This was 3 inches to this midway point, so this needs to be gathered to 3 inches. This other side was 3 1/4, so from here to here, gather to 3 1/4. So I still have to follow all of my original rules of labeling. Make sure the notches are there. Make sure any instructions on gathering are there. If there's pleating going on, make sure that goes on. All of this up here that I've put in, I could go in, figure out the dimensions, and figure out where to pleat it all. So instead of it all being gathered to the sleeve, to the bodice front, all of it's pleated to the bodice front. And well, just the bodice in general. So then I'd come back and I'm adding seam allowance all the way around the whole thing, including down here. So make sure you've got your grain line. And that is a leg of mutton sleeve. All right, so now we're going to talk about your pattern number 2 option, which is either a bishop, a lantern, or a circular. So if you go to page 313, you will see how to do a circular hemline. I'm not going to show you that one. You can figure this one out on your own, because guess what? Basically, it is just like how you start to do the puff sleeve. It's that slash up, add fullness, Isn't that kind of fun that we've already learned how to add fullness, and here it is. Here's how you apply it to a sleeve. So, add fullness. If you get to page 314, you can choose to do a bell sleeve. So instead of a circular or a lantern or a bishop, if you want to do a bell sleeve, you can do that too. But basically what a bell sleeve is a circular sleeve, just less intense. So a bell sleeve is a really, really, really beautiful way to do a sleeve. I will bring you down and I will show you a bell sleeve with a little bit different modification in the way they do it. So they're showing you how to just have the entire thing go out as a cylinder, but I want to show you a technique where it starts to flare. Like it can stay really tight, but then it starts to flare out. And we'll start using that technique, especially as we get into shirts. Sorry, my phone. I forgot to silence it before I started. So yeah, there's a technique that I'll show you on how to do a bell and let the bell start, sweeping out. So it's not just a cone, but it actually starts sweeping out. And we'll use this technique. You can use it anywhere, really. But it's another method of added fullness, and we just didn't talk about it during the added fullness because there was enough to talk about as it was. So I'm going to bring you down and I'm going to show you the bell. Actually, let me finish talking about where the bishop sleeve option is. Basically, the bell and the bishop are the exact same thing, but with a bishop sleeve, you suck the bottom of the shirt, the sleeve, you suck the bottom of the sleeve into a tight cuff. So if you go to page 329, it starts showing you the basic bishop sleeve. And the bishop sleeve is a beautiful sleeve. I really like the bishop sleeve. And in fact, I was at a restaurant the other day and there was a girl who was there who was a lawyer because she had just walked over from the courthouse. And she had a bishop sleeve on and it was a very modern look. So the drawing that they have on page 329 is perhaps a little bit excessive, but you can do a slight bishop sleeve and it ends up working great. So, same technique. One thing that you will notice though, and that I actually do like, is that at the back quarter of the sleeve, the bottom edge of the sleeve extends longer. And they don't give you a number on that, like how much further should it extend down at that back quarter of the sleeve. When I pull you down, I can tell you I'll just tell you right now. From the perfectly straight bottom of the sleeve that we developed, basically you can add 1/2 inch right at that back quarter and just smooth it up into either side. And what that does is it takes the place of the elbow dart so that when you go like this, it doesn't pull your sleeve tight up against your arm. What it does is it has some extra fabric in the length between your wrist and your elbow for you to be able to move. So that's actually a really good thing. I wish she showed you in the book how to go about doing that, but basically what it is go to that back quarter, drop it down 1/2 inch and blend up. And by the time it gets to the front, it's going to be basically by the time you pass the halfway point on the sleeve, you want it to be almost back to normal. So that's a good technique to have that go longer. So 329, basic bishop sleeve. I will start to do the bishop sleeve with the bell, and then we can talk about the cuff a little bit. And basically the cuff is going to be this dimension. That's basically what it is. So I'm not going to require you to do the cuff for a bishop sleeve. If you would like to, just to think through the process of, I've just done a bishop sleeve and now I will do a cuff as well. That would be a good thing to show me that you have thought through that, but I'm not going to require it for the assignment if you choose to do the bishop sleeve. And then the next one that I want you to look at, so it seems like I jumped ahead really quick for the bishop sleeve, but we're going to go back to page 318. And 318 is showing you how to do the lantern sleeve. And I did actually see one of these the other day. You don't see a lot of these. As I'm going past this, I'm also going to point out there is the petal sleeve in there. If you want to do a petal sleeve, you can do that one for one of your choices and figure it out on your own, but I'm not going to force you to do a petal sleeve. A lot of times they're adding extra fabric and trimming and stuff like that in the underarm. Just trust the underarm that you have already. You don't have to go change the underarm all the time like they're doing. So, page 317 starts the lantern sleeve. And I'm actually not going to show you the lantern sleeve. I think you can figure it out. But I will warn you against one thing in the book that she does. On page 318, you will notice on figure 4 that she just drops it. Drops the bottom edge 1 inch. Well, that suddenly just changed the length of that underarm seam right there. And that underarm seam is supposed to be able to get sewn to the lower sleeve, which you can see in figure 5. So anytime you just randomly throw a new number at it and change that dimension, you're going to run into problems when you ultimately try to sew it together. You've got to keep in mind, what does this get sewn to? And if I changed the length on this by arbitrarily throwing a number at it, I gotta go back and remeasure and make sure that it fits. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing for her to add that extra little bit there at 1 inch, because it's kind of like the bishop sleeve where they dropped it down a little bit at the back quarter just so the elbow has more room. So I'm not going to say that that's a problem, except for the fact that she didn't address it in figure 5 on the lower sleeve. So if you address it in both places, then you're fine. If you only address it in one, you got a problem, because that's where you're going to run into stuff not sewing together well. So with that, now I'm going to pull you down and I'm going to show you the bell technique. Yeah, okay. All right, so I have a new sleeve here. This is one without an elbow dart. You'll find that I typically don't do the one with the elbow dart. So we're going to look at the bell sleeve. This is page 314. But I promised that I would do a little bit extra flaring on it. So if we were to just use the book as is, then I would simply define a couple of straight lines here, slash it open, slash it open, slash it open, slash it open, open up the bottom, and we're good to go. If I were making it into a bishop sleeve, I would take my quarter spot, so I would take a measurement halfway through here, a measurement halfway through here, there's the quarter, and I would add a ½ inch down here and blend it back to here and blend it up like that. That's if I was doing the bishop sleeve. I could technically, this technique that I'm about to show you could work with the bishop sleeve too. So that idea of dropping this back a ½ inch, this back quarter a ½ inch at the hem, is a good idea. I'm not going to do it right now because I think you can figure it out. And this is where it happens, right here on the back side. And I know it's the back side because there's a double notch. So, to do added fullness on the sleeve, I can open up the whole thing if I want to, but what if I want it to stay tight up here but still have that, you know, added fullness at the bottom? So I want it tight here, but added fullness down here. Well, at that point, then I can start saying, where do I want it to start? So maybe I want it to start adding fullness 2 inches down right here. And I want it to start adding 2 inches down over here. I'm going to do the same thing to one side as I do to the other side. Well, then I could also want to add a little bit more so that it starts a little bit and then gets even more flared and then even more flared. So how about an inch down, an inch and a half down from here, I have another point. And then I want it to come down an additional inch and a half. Again, let's just say it gets a little fuller, and a little fuller. So I've got several spots here that I'm working with. So for this farthest point down, I'm going to start adding that fullness. Oh, I want it to start showing up about 3/4 of an inch in. And then I'm going to get that and angle it back like that. That's my slash line. I've got another one just up from that. So I'm going to come in and angle it back to that one. And you know what? I don't actually need this elbow line this time. So guess what? I'm just going to get rid of it right now so that I don't have to worry about crossing it out later. And then I've got one final spot to add. And it's going to be right there. So I'm going to do that to both sides. I'm just going to do it on one side, and you can think about it on the other side. Cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slash this highest one open. And I'm going to hinge it. I'm going to grab another piece of paper. And let's say I want to add, an inch. First, I'm going to tape it down, the main sleeve down. I'm going to tape it down. I'm going to measure over, let's just add 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to add that in there. Tape that down once it's in the spot I want it. And then I'm going to do the same thing to this next section. To keep the back nice and neat, I'm going to cut off the excess paper. So you can see what I just did there. I'm going to do the same thing for these other two. And I've basically done a bell sleeve or a bishop sleeve. You could even have this be the beginning of one part of the lantern sleeve if you want. There's lots of ways this technique could work into it. And this will just make a sleeve that increases in fullness as it goes. Now there's two spots when we're finishing this that are important, that they stay the same. And one of the reasons I like this method of adding fullness instead of just like randomly drawing a new line out that's curved on the side is because I can maintain this point here at the bottom and I can maintain this dimension here as well. And I can see as I'm adding paper exactly how much fullness I am adding to the sleeve. So there's a lot of benefit to being able to see exactly how much fullness you added. There's always a quick and dirty method for all of these things that I'm showing you. Try to avoid doing quick and dirty. Once you get to working on the computer with pattern making, you'll discover that it's really, really easy to do everything quick and dirty. But if you haven't done it like this by hand first, it'll show in your work. And believe me, there's other pattern makers that I work with that don't want to sew their own samples. I sew samples for a lot of people. And usually I'm just sewing samples for my own patterns, but every once in a while there's another pattern maker that shows up and says, I don't want to sew my own samples, David, will you sew my samples for me? And some of them use the computer for their pattern making, and those who use the computer and not by hand, I can always tell a difference, because the ones who do it by hand don't tend to break rules. People who go by the computer, their patterns are always a little bit worse, unfortunately. Okay, once that's done, and I've done it to both sides, do you see how it's sweeping out like this? So I'm going to take this point right here. I know this is the proper length because I didn't change anything along these lines. I can blend a little bit through these corners if I need to. And this line right here is the other important line, because I know that this is the appropriate length for the sleeve. So I'm going to make sure that from the center I square a line over, and from this side over here I start squaring a line down, and then I'm just going to take my curve and I'm going to blend between the two. You'll notice, let me zoom in so you can see what I'm chopping off. You'll notice this little shape sticking out the bottom and this little shape sticking off the bottom and that little bit. Those will get cut off. It's true, they get cut off, and you're like, well, darn, David, that's extra fabric. How do I make sure that I could, I guess, take this bottom part and add length to the sleeve and have it go over. That's one way I can deal with them. The reason why I'm not really concerned about cutting that off is because up here, I've just increased the length in this section right here. So just because it's sticking out here is not a problem, because I've accounted for how much it's sticking out down here, up here. So it's not a huge issue. That can get cut off. But now I end up coming back here and I add on my seam allowance, and I add on my seam allowance all the way up everywhere. I make sure that I take care of all my layering, so I've got my grain line. I've got my grain line. I've got my two notches up here. I've got my notch for the shoulder seam right here. I've got my front here. I will have already done everything over here like I did here. And it's good to go. So there is a different take on the bell sleeve. It's a different take on the bishop sleeve. On the bishop sleeve, this would actually technically come down a little bit here further. That's okay. And that is how you do a different way of adding fullness that we haven't shown yet. Cool. All right, so now we're going to talk about the basic kimono. So we're looking at your third pattern that you're going to turn in for sleeves. And for the third pattern, you get a choice of doing the raglan or the kimono. I might suggest you do the raglan just because you see more raglans in the world than you see kimonos in the world. But let me take you through the kimono first. So if you go to page 334, we're in chapter 15 now, they talk about the basic kimono. Now, first thing that you'll notice is this is not like a kimono from Asian culture. This is not that kind of a kimono sleeve. On a lot of those old kimonos that you have, that's a different technique. This kimono, I don't know why they call it that, because it's not actually accurate to the cultural kimono. But since that's what they call it here, that's what we're going with. And when you say a kimono sleeve, a lot of people will know that this one's you're talking about. The other thing that they might think of when they see this sleeve is a dolman sleeve, but the dolman happens right after the kimono sleeve, and it just means that the armhole is dropped even further. Same technique, really. So call it a kimono or a dolman, whatever you want to call it. But the kimono, basically, we abandon this piece. We abandon our main sleeve and we just kind of go haywire, which is why you want to know this dimension here is for something like this, when you're going to develop the sleeve into the rest of the garment. But one thing to note is that you maintain some darts so that there's still a little bit of fitting. As much fitting that we can have, we'd like to have, just because we like it for garments to smooth over the body beautifully. So we're going to hold on to that. The other one that I want you to look at for your third pattern is the Raglan. Now, the Raglan, the way they develop it, it's okay. Don't worry, I'm not sick. It's just the smoke in the air. It's okay the way they develop it, and I want you to look at the way that they develop it. We're jumping through a whole bunch of different kinds of sleeves here, so go ahead and read through the chapter. I'm just pinging some big hitters that you're going to run into and that you might want to do in the future. So go to page 348. Now, the thing with a Raglan sleeve is that it takes this underarm curve, and instead of coming over the top, it comes and takes it into the neckline. So some things that you suddenly have to start worrying about with doing that is, I still have a huge bulge right here called my shoulder. How do I take care of it? Now, the way that they take care of it is they still use your basic sleeve block, like this one. They still use that, like the one that you started with, not the ones that we've developed, but the one that you started with. They take that one, and they do some funky things to it, and they peg on, they chop stuff off, and you end up with their designs, you end up with a dart over the top of the shoulder that ends right here. So you end up with a dart to take care of this bulge, or you end up with an overarm seam that goes all the way down. Both of those are fine. If you want to have an extremely fitted garment still, those are fine. But usually when we're doing a Raglan sleeve, that's not the point. The point of the Raglan sleeve is to be able to have ease of movement, which is why you see Raglan sleeves in baseball shirts. It's because it allows the baseball person to have a full range of motion. And what they're doing is they're putting it in so that you can add a whole bunch more fabric right here and still be able to have movement. So I'm going to show you another method. If you want to do the method in the book that she shows you, grand. But I'm going to show you a different method to get to the Raglan sleeve that I prefer, because usually when I'm doing a Raglan sleeve for people, it's because they want that extra ease of movement. So to do that, remember back to sleeve theory, how we developed a pattern out for a 2-inch cap or a higher cap. Basically, I'm going to use the 2-inch sleeve cap for this one to develop out the Raglan sleeve. So I'm using a different sleeve cap to start out with, which obviously means that I'm going to have extra fabric in here already, just because of the sleeve that I'm using. So I'm going to bring you down and I'll show you the Raglan sleeve and I'll show you the Kimono sleeve as well. All right, we are now going to be doing the Kimono sleeve. The kimono is on page 334. So head to 334, and you'll notice I already have everything here, but you'll also notice that I have, let me label some stuff really quick. So here's my center front, and it's on a fold. Here's my center back, and it's on a fold. They are separate. So on 334, you'll notice that I have some extra lines drawn. And I don't think that she talks through it as well as she should in the book. So on 334, she closes the center front dart a little bit, is what you'll notice starts happening. And the reason for that is because we need to keep the front sleeve and the back sleeve as identical as we can. So she's closing this dart, and the reason why she's closing this dart is so that she can bring the armhole down to the same level as the armhole on the back. The side seams are the same length, but we need both of these to fit together, like, and construct the sleeve with basically this point and this point and this point and this point all being sort of at the same level. Well, we've got some things to worry about. I can't guarantee this point and this point will be the same distance apart because of this shoulder dart up here, and I also can't guarantee it because I've got the front dart here. So the areas that we're going to work from that they both share are high point shoulder. So this right here is the same on both of them. And I'm measuring across a square across from center back how far down the underarm is from high point shoulder. And on the back is the one that is going to stay the same. On my back, it's 4 3/4 of an inch down. Make sure you measure yours. Yours might be different. So mine is 4 3/4 of an inch down. On the front from high point shoulder, when I measure across from center front over to here, mine is down 3 5/8 of an inch. So it's not at the level of 4 3/4. It's actually over an inch off. So what we've got to do is I've got to take this and bring it down to the same level of 4 3/4. So I'm going to figure out how far down 4 3/4 is from high point shoulder, straight down, and straight across. I am going to slash my dart open and slash up into the armhole, and it doesn't really matter where in the armhole, it just has to be in the armhole. And then I'm going to start closing my dart. And as I close my dart, you'll notice the armhole point here is lowering. So then I just have to make sure I've got my point already figured out right here. I just need to make sure that I close the dart until it matches up. And then I'm going to tape my dart into place. Just like that. So this line right now down from high point shoulder, if I were to line up that new line, if I were to line up my high point shoulders up here, perfectly in line up here, I'm not looking at the necklines, I'm not looking at that, I'm only looking at high point shoulder because these don't get sewn together. I've got my center front and center back right on top of each other. Where the same distance down from high point shoulder, that line going across perfectly matches up with both of my underarms. That's important. They've got to be the same before we start this. If they're not the same, then you'll end up having a problem. But we can still keep our dart. So go ahead and finish the dart. Here's the bust point. I've got there's the middle. I'm going to back it away from the bust point. You could have had your bust circle already on there if you wanted. You're probably noticing that sometimes I just don't transfer it over because it just makes my pattern messy. So then I'm going to perfect that dart the way that we do, and that dart's done. It's good, I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm gonna keep the back dart as well, so I have to perfect that one as well, and it's good. This dart up here will end up going away. It'll just disappear into the sleeve. And now what we're gonna do is I need to make sure I fill this in before I go any further. Let me just grab a piece of scrap paper. And fill this in really quick. And you might be wondering, oh gosh, David, what do you do with the rest of the dart that you moved up into there? Don't worry about it. It will just go away. So then, now that I'm all set up with these 2 points at the same level from high point shoulder, I can start developing out my pattern. And I think what I'm going to do, what you're going to do is this. You take the back high point shoulder, and you're just going to extend that line straight out. I could extend it all out to the length of the actual sleeve, like I could add on paper here. I'm going to make this short for the sake of paper, but you can continue to extend it out there. So I'm going to make sure, like I'm going to take the bicep measurement. Let's take the elbow measurement because this is about as far out as the elbow is. So that's 4 inches. Yeah, I'm going to take the elbow measurement. So at the elbow, half of the elbow is 3 inches. So coming down from here at the elbow, 3 inches, and I just made an arbitrary point. I'm going to make sure that this is 90 degrees. And it's coming down here 3 inches. From this 3-inch point, I'm going to take that and I'm going to blend it down onto the side seam. Make sure that for at least 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 an inch at full size, but on 1/4 inch on this half size, that this is 90 degrees for a good 1/4 of an inch. And you're going to let this blend down onto the side seam. Just like that. And now, guess what? I can get rid of the rest of this and the rest of this and all of this. And I can get rid of that dart. There's the kimono sleeve done on the back. When you do the kimono, you do need to do the front and the back because they are developed at the same time. Actually, don't get rid of your side seam yet. Sorry, that was premature. So don't get rid of your side seam yet. Here's the side underarm. I just retraced my line. It was kind of faded. So the question is then, how do I transfer this over onto this? I'm going to extend my front shoulder out. The same length that I extended it out here. So here I've got it at 7 1/4, so I'm going to extend this out at 7 1/4 as well. I need it to drop down the same amount as the other one, which was 3 inches. Now this is when we're going to have to potentially, I'm not going to say that it's a must, it is going to happen. I might have to do a little bit of finagling. But I'm going to take my back curve and I'm going to match up the bottom corner here and this corner here at the underarm I'm going to flip my paper over and I'm going to line them up with their respective positions. You will probably find that it varies just a smidge. That's okay. I'm going to line it up as best as I can, but mostly what I'm going to do is make sure that this side seam here starts lining up with this side seam. So this will actually probably stick out a little bit too far down here. And this is when we have to really work with truing our pattern. So I'm lining it up with its side seam right there, and I can see through. And I'm going to trace that over. So I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of like a carbon copy paper. It transferred over right there. And now I get to make sure that it's the same length. These both are the same length. And that could happen two ways. I can either shorten the back, which I probably won't do, or I might lengthen the front. But this from here to here is, it can increase in length, no problem. So this is 6 1/4. This needs to become 6 1/4. So I'm going to actually add 1/4 of an inch to the front. So obviously maybe don't have perfected this yet, because this has to blend back in. And I'm just going to add 1/4 of an inch to the entirety of center front. Extend my dart legs. Perfect that new dart. Get rid of the old lines. I can get rid of all of these interior lines. And it's good to go. So there you go. That is one way to do a kimono. She does a couple things different. Her way is good too. I just find this way a little bit easier, is making sure that my side pieces line up and then just transferring it over and making sure it's the exact same on both of them, and it'll sew together, because I know that this length, let me back it up, sorry. Because I know that this length on the front is the same as this length on the back. I know that this shape is going to be the exact same as this shape, so it'll sew together really easy. And then because it's such a loose fit, me adding on a little 1/4 of an inch down here isn't going to be a huge deal. Not going to be a big deal at all. So then to finish this up, make sure you either have the 3 dots there, or if you're going to have a seam line, make sure that you've got your arrow for your grain line. Remember, 3 dots are only for if you're putting this on a fold and it's a grain line. Make sure that you have the name of bodice front, bodice back. Make sure that you've got the notches at the end of every dart leg. You might consider putting a notch midway through that curve to help the sewing of this curve to this curve. You might consider adding some notches up above on here to help people figure out how to put those pieces together. When I flipped it over, I was just transferring notches. That's all I was doing. Make sure you perfect your darts. Make sure you add seam allowance everywhere. Let's say you want a 1-inch hem over here. This is when you can start thinking about it. So I could have, you know, my 1/4 inch seam allowance here, here, and all the way along this underarm. That page that I asked you to read because it's a really good way to finish stuff, this is a good time to think about using that technique. So let's say I want this to finish at 1 inch. And I also need seam allowance at the end of that to help it finish even more. Then what I'm going to do, I'm not going to finish drawing it in right here. I'm going to fold this at where I want the hem. I've shown how much hem I want. Now I'm going to fold it underneath so it's all hemmed, right? Well, if I cut along all of these edges, along my seam allowance, here, when I open it up, it will have given me this interesting shape here. Well, that is the shape that is needed in order to finish this hem. So start thinking about your hems. How do you want to finish edges? Because I know that this is the edge. How do I finish that? Well, now is the time that you get to start doing that. So I'll start looking to see if you guys are starting to think through, how am I finishing these edges? This might still get down here. The hem might actually get sewn into a pair of pants, like into a jumpsuit or a skirt, or become a dress or something like that. But this is the end. Like, that's all it is. I'm not going to stick a cuff on that. I'm not going to do anything. So, like, how am I going to finish that? What's the hem look like? So start thinking about that. All right. Now we're going to show you the final option, which is the Raglan. And to use the Raglan, I'm going to use my 2 inch. And I'm going to need my bodice front and my bodice back. So I'm going to transfer these over and then I'll start recording again. All right, so I have my 3 pattern pieces that I need. I've got my center front. You'll note I have already perfected my dart because I am just going to leave it alone. On the back, I've also perfected my dart down here. I haven't done anything with the dart up here because that'll go away. And then I have my 2 inch sleeve cap sleeve. Those are the sleeves that I need to create those are the pieces that I need to create a Raglan. So I'm going to zoom in really quick and I'm going to look at the front. So the key thing with the Raglan is that we want that underarm up until the notch to stay the same. And then from here, the armhole will no longer continue up here. I want it to come over to the neckline. And that curve can be whatever you want. You can have it come up here. You can have it come down here. You can have it do whatever you want. That curve doesn't matter. That is a style line. Just make sure it's nice and crisp. So I'm going to get my nice ruler and I'm going to blend it in so that it goes into the underarm smoothly. So notice how it's a nice smooth transition as it goes between here. That's what you want. Once that happens, I can add my seam allowance on the sides. I'm not gonna, yeah, I can add it to the neckline. I'm not gonna add it to the shoulders yet. And I'm not gonna add it to the rest of this underarm. Because now what I'm gonna do, and this is crucial, several of you have not been cutting apart your patterns. It is crucial. You have to cut this off, and you've got to be pretty darn exact about it because this is your new design line. Okay? So here I have my shoulder. Here I have my new design line. Actually, before you take it off, if you want to, you could add a nice little notch right here. We've still got this underarm notch, but that will probably change. This will definitely probably change just because you're attaching it to a sleeve that might have some extra ease in its cap. So this might have to alter a little bit, but we don't know that yet. We sneak up on stuff like this. So this particular piece, all that I need to do with it now is come back in and add my seam allowance. So I'm coming in here and I'm adding in I lied. This notch here at the underarm on the front, that's not going to change at all. Like on the front and back, all the notches that we add right here at the beginning, literally this piece, once it's all cut out, is done. That's it. So this is like the Raglan bodice front. And come and cut it out all the way. And we're good. So I mean, remember your size. So this is an 8. I need one of it because one in the self fabric, because this is on a fold. Yeah, so there we go. It is set, ready to go. So I'm done with this piece. Now I get to move on to the back. And I'm going to do the very same sort of thing. I get to go from the underarm and decide how it's going to come into the neckline. What's nice is as I design this, notice I can take this from the underarm over to the neckline via the bottom of that dart. And I bet you know what I'm going to do with it. So I'm going to add seam allowances to my neckline. Seam allowances to the bottom, seam allowances to the side. Now I am going to cut off along this line. I'm going to come in here and add some seam allowance. I might plop this back on here really quick so I can get another notch point. And the back is done. So I need to make sure I have my label of where's my grain line, some other points that are important, and this is Raglan bodice back. I have a size 8 here, and this is, I just need one of them in the self fabric. And let's make this front piece a number 1 piece, and this a number 2 piece. And now those are both done, so all I have to worry about now is the sleeve. But I had to do all of that before I could get to the sleeve. So here I have my sleeve, and I have my part from bodice front. Here's the shoulder, here's the neckline, here's the armhole. Shoulder, neckline, armhole on my back. I've still got a little problem on the back though, because I need to close this dart. And all I can do is slash along one leg of the dart, pivot it shut, and it's taken care of. Okay, so now we get into how do we attach this to the sleeve? Well, I know that this is the back. I've got 2 notches here, so I know that's the back. Let me just double check, because I think my sleeve might have been for the left side of the body, and this might have been for the right, in which case I need to reverse my... This is for the right. This is for the right. That should be correct. That's for the right. That's for the right. Okay, yeah, that is. Oh, yeah, doy. Hello. For a moment I was confused by my own thing. So beware, you can get turned around on this. So here, remember this is the shoulder and this is the neckline. Let me zoom in here really quick. Remember this is the shoulder and this is the neckline. If you need to make little labels so you can understand which one's which, this is the armhole. So usually this right here, if you hear moaning in the back, that's my dog sleeping and he's snoring. So that's what's going on. So this would have gotten sewn from here to here. So this edge right here gets sewn from here to here. Notice what's interesting. See how the distance is different? This right here to here is distance different than the distance from here to here. That is because of sleeve cap ease. Because you'll notice the same on the front. Let's get the front armhole over here as well. So here's the neckline. Here's the neckline. Here's the shoulder. And here's the armhole. So that's supposed to fit on here. Let me just cut it off at the shoulder so you can see how it goes together. I'll cut it off on the shoulder here as well. Here's the 2 shoulders getting sewn together. They get sewn together like that. Here's the neckline. Cut off this front part. You can see those coming together. Here's the front piece. Here's the piece that we cut off of it, right here. Here's the back piece. There's the part that we cut off of it, right there. Usually they get sewn together right there. That's usually what happens, but we've cut them off. So the front's gone and the back's gone. So now this needs to get attached to here. This needs to fit on here. But unfortunately, this point right here is supposed to fit onto this, and this point right here is supposed to fit over here. So how do we take care of that? What I'm going to do is I'm going to tape the shoulder together at high point shoulder. I'm letting this stay open. I'm just putting it together right here. And I'm going to hinge that spot so that it stays together all the time, but it can hinge really easily. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line the point up from the back with the spot it needs to go, and the point on the front to the spot that it needs to go. And I'm going to tape it into place, like that. Hopefully that made some sort of sense. So here is the sleeve cap, here's the back part, here's the front part, and now the front, when this gets sewn together, this will sew down here, and right here, where their notches were, suddenly there's the underarm, and they'll get sewn together. Underarm, underarm, those get sewn together. They're unlike curves, but that's okay. That's why we learned how to sew unlike curves together. This point to this point is the same. This point to this point is the same. So this is ready, can get sewn to this now. Same with the back. This goes together from here to the double notch works, and then the underarm works as well. Okay? So now all I have to do is fill in any empty gaps. So notice, just a couple things before I do anything else. Notice how much I added here. That's extra fabric for movement. That's what it is. That's all that is. Notice this shoulder kind of dove down into the sleeve cap a little bit. Well, we're going to have to address that, because we just changed the length. And I think you already know what we're going to do. We're going to figure out the length that it should be from high point shoulder over the tip of the shoulder down to the bottom of the sleeve. We'll figure out what that distance is supposed to be, measure it, and whatever doesn't fit, so this should have been 11 inches plus that, so it should have been 13 and a half, and currently it is 13. So it's half an inch too short. So I can just chalk out on half an inch at the bottom of the sleeve. That's what we do, is we just add it to the bottom of the sleeve. We don't worry about it up here. All of this is doing what we want it to. We chalk it on the bottom of the sleeve, and that'll work. The other thing that we could do is just say, hey, I don't want this to be a long sleeve shirt, I want it to be a short sleeve shirt. And then we figure out where we want from high point shoulder the bottom of our sleeve to be, and we cut it off there and add our hem and all that, and we're good to go. So I wouldn't make the sleeve short right away. Well, you can, just for the sake of paper. But let me finish filling this all in. I'm going to smooth any lines that need to be smoothed. Like right here on the neckline. I'd smooth that a little bit. I don't need this anymore, or that, or this, or this, or this, or this, or this, any of that. None of that, none of that, none of that. All of that goes away. All of it. All of that information goes away so that when I transfer this over to a new pattern piece, all of this space will just be open and no extra lines. This seam line, this grain line right here, that still works. So I'm going to keep that. The underarm bias line, that still works. Ultimately, that's not going to be on final patterns anyways. For production, that's not going to be on final lines, so that could go away. And then I'm going to add my seam allowance. Cut all of this out. Make sure those notches are nice and dark. Or that those notches are actually notched. Label it Raglan sleeve. It's a size 8. I need 2 of them, and let's do this in a combo fabric. This will be piece number 3. And that's it. I've got my grain line, and that is complete. If you're doing the raglan, you need to turn in all 3 pieces. The front, the back, and the sleeve. On the sleeve, make sure that you also finish out seam allowances on the edges and bottom as well. All of that needs to be complete. The way, just an idea really quick, just for you to be like, oh gosh, I want the movement of a raglan, but I don't necessarily want the sleeve to be really tight. If you know how narrow the sleeve can be, so it came from this pattern, at the elbow it can go down to 5.5 inches. At the elbow on here, oh, here's my elbow. I did have that marked. I just didn't draw the dark line. At the elbow here, it can also, you can start messing with how slim the sleeve is here. You just have to make sure that by the time it gets back up to the underarm up here, this still stays pretty much exactly 90 degrees. So there's some tweaking you can do to get the sleeve to be a little bit narrower, but this dimension across here has to be pretty wide when you go down to a 2-inch sleeve cap. If I had started with a 3-inch sleeve cap on this, these might have actually been up a little bit higher. So it depends on what your block is. This particular block made it so that we lost a little bit here. I've worked with blocks in the past where a 2-inch sleeve cap, these were still sitting out here. So it depends kind of on your sleeve, on your blocks that you begin with. But yeah, there you go. There is a raglan. Hopefully everything makes sense and you are good to go for the sleeve section. Ooh, actually one more thing, let me pull this up. Just kind of looking at your assignment, you can see how disastrous everything gets when I'm in the middle of this. For your assignment on the your choice, some stuff that you might consider doing, you might consider doing the dolman, you might consider doing the petal. So some ideas, look at page 327. They have some fun things to do with the armhole dart. Also, that wrapped sleeve, that's kind of incredible. That's pretty cool. So have fun with it. Yeah. On the cowl, the reason why I didn't show you the cowl, if you go to that page really quick, 325, the sleeve that she does there doesn't actually exist on any of those designs up there. So in order to still maintain the sleeve cap, you have to do it differently. So if any of you want to see that, talk to me in class and we can play with it in class on how you would go about doing a cowl sleeve. The way she shows it works for design 3. If that were a long sleeve, it would work for design 3. But what she's showing you does not work for design 2, nor does it work for design 1, because both of those still have a sleeve cap, and the thing that she creates doesn't have a sleeve cap. So there's an issue with her pattern there. Yeah, so have fun. Look through all of the other things in the book, all the other sleeve types in the book that you might be like, oh my goodness, I've never seen that before. And try them out. So, have a great day.